evening to you. I'm Abby Martin, and this is Breaking the Set. Well, here's a story that's sure to keep you up at night. According to findings just released by the Air Force, 34 officers at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana were just caught cheating on a proficiency exam. All right. So cheating on a test isn't really that bad. I mean, we've all done it. Except I forgot to mention one small thing. Malmstrom houses ballistic missiles, and the officers caught cheating were taking a test on nuclear launch procedures. But if that's not enough to make you want to cower under a table, don't worry, it gets worse. The whole reason this cheating scandal came to light in the first place is because the Air Force launched an investigation into drug use among officers at the base and discovered the cheating through their text messages. Isn't it nice to know that Rob Ford and Alex Rodriguez are apparently guarding the nation's nuclear arsenal? But at the very least, we know that the nuclear launch codes are extremely complicated and hard to crack, right? Actually, no. You see, according to Dr. Bruce Blair, former nuclear missile launch officer, up until 1977, the launch code to set off nukes was, wait for it, 00000000. Yep, 8 zeros in a row. But don't worry, I'm sure by now the Air Force has changed that code to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now let's break the set.
It was a terrible mistake, and we're working very hard to make up for it.
And once again, we put something on the air. It's a flat-out lie.
Have you ever had sex with Governor Rick Perry?
No, wait. Do not answer that.
I want you to watch what we're about to do because you've never seen anything like this on television.
What we need is to question more and to keep it uncensored, real and raw. My simple mission is to change the globe. I'ma do it with this passion and fire and tone. These words are hard hitting, you're watching your neck, but you need to tune in because we're breaking the set. Breaking the set. Breaking the set.
On this show, I try to highlight the devious and sneaky methods Big Brother uses to keep a constant eye on all of us. But now it looks like Big Brother is about to watch himself. You see, yesterday, Los Angeles police officers began participating in a case study involving wearing belt and shoulder cameras as cops patrol the streets. According to officials, the captured video is instantly displayed on an iPod and then uploaded, where the video is saved for 5 years. About 30 officers are participating in the program over the next 90 days, and the use of these cameras are expected to be widely expanded. Take a look.
By the summer, 600 cameras will be purchased with $1.3 million donated by the community. Supporters say the goal is to have the cameras for the entire force, ultimately saving the city millions in lawsuits.
Okay, I won't deny that this makes some sense. In theory, cameras attached to officers do ensure a certain level of police accountability. In fact, the city of Rialto, California, tested out this cop camera program for 12 months. And in that time, police assaults dropped by 2/3 from the previous year, and the department had an 88% decline in the number of citizen complaints against officers. But of course, in a country where every city block is constantly filmed and monitored, you can't blame me if I just have a few concerns about an army of recording robocops. First, although the LAPD is currently working on a rules manual to govern the use of these cameras, there are currently no regulations that protect the privacy of citizens. Second, despite multiple attempts that have failed to prevent citizens from filming police officers in nearly every state, cops continue to confiscate cameras from bystanders. In California alone, this happens all the time, most notably back in May, when Bakersfield officers intimidated witnesses into giving up their cameras after they savagely beat 33-year-old man David Sal Silva to death. Or when Manuel Diaz was shot and killed by police in Anaheim, and police used excessive force against women and children in the resulting protest. Afterward, cops tried to buy footage from witnesses because they were scared of what the video would show. So, considering the epidemic of police brutality and the lack of accountability for the boys in blue, why should we trust police departments to hold the only official record of events when they continue to try to cover up citizen recordings? These are all questions that still need answers before we should start to wholeheartedly embrace this program. And you know, maybe instead of pointing these cameras at citizens, the cops should be pointing these cameras at themselves. In fact, hundreds of Ukrainians recently took this exact idea to heart. Last month, after riot police beat protesters with batons and even kicked and punched demonstrators that had fell to the ground, the people came back with a genius plan. Instead of responding with violence, protesters held up mirrors in front of a line of riot cops to show them the monsters they had become. These powerful images have since gone viral and demonstrate the importance of police self-awareness. So, while I applaud the attempt to creatively address the serious issue of police brutality, until citizens are allowed to freely exercise their right to film on-duty cops, I'll be approaching this program with my own watchful eye. Washington, D.C. is a place where the power players of the world converge. But as rich of a history as this city has, it also has a dark side. And I'm not even talking about the shady wheelings and dealings between corporate America and the politicians that are supposedly representing us. No, I'm talking about unsolved mysteries that have left permanent scars on the district's history. Events that have led to disappearances and unexplained deaths, many of which we'll probably never solve. So join me now to just go over 5 of these mysterious deaths. I'm joined by Breaking the Set producer Manuel Rapolo. What's going on, man?
How's it going? Good to be back.
So this is probably the most bizarre case. And all of these cases, you know, they've happened over the course of a couple decades, some more notorious than others. Let's start with the D.C. Madam.
Yeah. Well, actually, what's really interesting about whenever we were putting this case together, we were talking about all these unexplained deaths, and we tried to narrow down this list and come to find out that when we put this list together, all of these happen here in Washington, D.C., or at least have a... Yeah, what a coincidence. So yeah, the D.C. Madam scandal, I think everybody can remember that back in 2008 when she was convicted, convicted of racketeering and all these things related to this prostitution ring that she was running here in Washington. The thing about it is that, you know, she was, some people say that she was paranoid, but she went on the record as many as 4 times publicly stating in a variety of places saying, you know, if I wind up dead, immediately investigate this. This is murder. So she went
said,
out.
I'm never going to kill myself. She said that she could implicate the entire government. I mean,
and think about it. She was. This was a very high-level place. There were plenty of big power players in the city whose careers she could have ruined, lives she could have ended here in D.C. So I mean, there was a motive there. Do we know exactly what happened? No. The official cause of death was that she was found hanging in a mobile home in her mother's house in Florida. Then again, you know, the manager at her condo where she lived said, you know, she wore nice clothes, she led a very extravagant lifestyle. The last place that you'd expect to find her is dead in a mobile home somewhere in Florida. So, I mean, one of the more suspicious ones.
And of course, the corporate media totally ignored any of these kind of bizarre
The only outlet
details.
that ran it was the Washington Post, and they did it a whole week later, and even when they did, they backpaged it. So it's these kinds of things that, you know, it's an ongoing thing. You see that with all these cases of mysterious deaths, the one kind of common denominator is that the corporate media doesn't really seem to care.
It just seems like someone as high profile as her that has so much dirt on so many politicians, if she comes out multiple times and says, I'm never going to kill myself if you find me dead, for God's sake, please investigate it. Everyone's like, ah, she killed herself.
Shortly before saying, I'm about to expose the government. Like,
right. Let's move on to Bertha Champagne. This is one that's really very little people talk about this or know about it. She was actually the nanny, the babysitter for the Bush family. Yeah. Lived in their home. She was 62 years old, Mexican-American woman, Bertha Champagne. Oddly enough, she was found smashed against a Secret Service building on their compound.
Right, this was just outside of the Bush house, right? And so President Bush was president at the time. So what happened was that the official story, the official narrative, is that her car was left in gear, and so she found herself somehow pinned between the car and this security post that was built by the Secret Service.
An empty car, mind you.
An empty car. And so the big question is, because police have never given an official story of what actually caused her death, the big question is, why did the car not move until the very moment where she happened to be right between that?
The big question is, how could she be standing there in a rolling empty car? I mean, if you see a car kind of with the e-brake off or whatever, it rolls back. I mean, she couldn't get out of the way. There was a force in that car that smashed her against this building. Security officers, Secret Service in the building didn't respond.
That's the other question. That's the other question. Why didn't the security that was there, the private security that was there on site, not respond to her distress? That's, you know, one of the other.
Bigger question is, what did she know?
Exactly. Well, that's the other thing.
Right.
I mean, this is a time where a lot of volatile information was being exchanged at this house. Was she had she happened to overhear something? What did she hear? We may never know. We probably won't.
Mike Connell. This was actually a surprising one. Mark Crispin Miller turned me onto this. He was the top GOP consultant for Karl Rove. Died in a single-engine plane that he was flying. He was the only casualty in that plane. Why is his death suspicious?
If you remember back in 2004 McCain-Kerry elections in Ohio, there was a bunch of glitches in the voting machines. Those glitches were later traced back to a computer system that was developed by Michael Connell. Michael Connell was later in 2008 subpoenaed over potential voter fraud related to hacking that system and becoming something known as a middleman, where you're able to either block votes coming in or change votes as they're tabulated. He was able to testify, but just after that, he boarded a plane just outside of D.C., and that it was a single-engine Piper Saratoga. That plane crashed, and what lawyers and attorneys connected to this case saying is that had he come forward with more information, that would have absolutely led to the questioning and subpoenaing of Karl Rove in connection to voter fraud, connected not only to 2004 elections, but even 2008.
And of course, those voting machines are still in place today, and no one really talked about this death or really that whole testimony following up. We only have, sorry, go on.
CBS was the only one that covered it, and I mean, maybe if we'd heard more about it, we'd put an end to this type of voting system.
We only have time for one more, so we're going to talk about Bruce Ivins, the ultimate last suspect of the anthrax attacks, the horrible attack that actually localized terrorism. Mere weeks after 9/11, we saw those letters come out, mysteriously sent to congressmen who had opposed the Patriot Act and also prominent members of the news. It really localized the event. It made kind of grandma in Alabama be scared of terrorism, whereas, you know, all we had seen was the terrorist attacks in New York before. Really odd, though, is how much there's a lack of evidence to point to Bruce Ivins.
Not only the lack of evidence, it was all circumstantial, but on top of that is the cause of death. We're talking about a microbiologist who worked with the biodefense division of the U.S. government and decides to kill himself. Method of death is overdose, a Tylenol overdose. One of the slowest, most painful ways to die.
Days to detoxify your liver. You think that a microbiologist, first of all, what was his motive to frame Muslims in the attack? Right. Second of all, this is after Stephen Hatfield was already basically accused for years and years, a hefty payout, millions of dollars of taxpayer dollars, because he was the wrong accuser. And then they accuse him, 24-hour surveillance. They tried to bribe his daughter. She was hospitalized. They tried to bribe his son to out him. Really, all circumstantial. All they could ultimately say was that he had a history of depression.
Right. Right.
And case closed, I guess.
And all of his friends saying that he didn't do it, and his colleagues.
So, you know, case closed, and unfortunately, Obama's kind of made it very clear that the anthrax attacks will never be reopened. Manny, thank you so much for coming on, breaking all of this down.
We'll talk about some more another time.
Really crazy stuff here. Manuel Rapolo. Coming up, you guys, I'll take on Nestle once again, but this time over chocolate. Stay tuned.
We welcome Aaron Aid and Abby Martin, two of the terrific hosts on the RT network.
Boom Bust, it's going to give you a different perspective.
Give me one stock tip.
Oh, never. I'll give you the information, you make the decision.
Tell me about how breaking the set works.
It's a revolution of the mind, it's a revolution of ideas and consciousness.
Are you frustrated with the system?
Yeah, extremely.
Your politics would be described as angry.
I think I'm a strong female.
Are you single?
5 seconds. And over the mic is all feeling to go.
Did you know the press is the only industry specifically mentioned in the Constitution?
Stand by.
That's because a free and open press is critical to our democracy.
Track Alpha. Roll Alpha.
In fact, the single biggest threat facing our nation today is the corporate takeover of our government and our press.
Stand by, camera 1.
We've been hijacked by a handful of powerful transnational corporations that will profit by destroying what our founding fathers once built up. I'm Tom Hartman, and on this show, we reveal the big picture of what's actually going on in the world. We go beyond identifying a problem. We try to fix it. Rational debate and a real discussion of the critical issues facing America.
Stand by on camera, go.
Ready to join the movement? Then welcome to the big picture.
You guys, although it's an entire month away, stores are already lining their shelves with Valentine's Day garbage. And according to corporate America, nothing symbolizes love and commitment more than chocolate. See, the U.S. imports about 21% of the world's chocolate, and the average American eats over 11 pounds of it per year. This hardly comes as a surprise, considering how oversized candy bars are stuffed in every vending machine and store counter across America. But you might be surprised to learn that nearly every time you take a bite of that delicious sweetness, you have the hands of a child slave to thank. Yes, you heard me right. And the corporations most responsible for this horrendous practice are Mars, Hershey, and most of all, Nestle. If you're a fan of this show, you probably already know about my disdain for Nestle, which also happens to be the largest purveyor of bottled water worldwide. Because really, who could forget this?
Hello, Abby. I'm Stephanie from Nestle.
Yes, I was lucky enough to receive a personal response from their giant PR department after calling out the company's method of water extraction and privatization. Well, Nestle isn't just sucking up the world's water supply and selling it back to the poor chaps it's stealing it from. The corporation's also known for their chocolate monopoly and the slave labor that goes along with it. Nestle chocolate milk and powder aside, you might be surprised to learn that Nestle is the umbrella corporation that owns some of your favorite candy, including Kit Kat, Butterfinger, Wonka, Milky Way, Chunky, Smarties, 100 Grand, Baby Ruth, and even chocolate power bars. That's by no means an exhaustive list. To many, it's simply unthinkable that rewarding your child's sweet tooth has come at a devastating cost of another child's indentured servitude. Yet Africa's Ivory Coast produces more than half of the planet's chocolate, and the conditions on these cocoa farms there contain some of the world's most abysmal conditions for child workers.
Shocking pictures of children working with machetes and hazardous chemicals. Some said they were held against their will, forced to work, and many told us they never get paid. UNICEF estimates that more than 200,000 children could be involved in some of the worst forms of child labour.
Yes, at least 200,000 children are enslaved on the cocoa farms in the Ivory Coast alone. It's a country with no real laws against human trafficking. And as a result, children are being trafficked or outright stolen from their parents to work on the farms. These kids are around 11 to 15 years old, and many times even younger. According to an in-depth CNN investigation, they are forced to do hard manual labor, 80 to 100 hours a week, and paid absolutely nothing. Most of the children slaving away their lives on the field had never even eaten chocolate and have no idea what the cocoa is even used for. They have machete scars from cutting the brush all day and are severely beaten or even killed if they try to leave. What's perhaps most disturbing is that this is still happening 13 years after Congress passed the Harkin-Engel Protocol, or the Cocoa Protocol, in 2001. The bill called for public reporting by African governments to voluntarily certify that they had ended the practice of child labor. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. Today, human rights organizations report that some of the provisions still haven't been met. And no surprise, it's the biggest corporations who refuse to comply. But according to former CEO of Nestle, Peter Brabeck, the Ivory Coast would be worse off if Nestle weren't doing business there. That's the same guy that said water isn't a universal human right. So, what can we do to still fill our chocolate cravings without the guilt of knowing it's helping perpetuate the slave trade? Well, according to Washington Post, luckily there are several certifications on chocolate labels that indicate a slavery-free supply chain, including Fair Trade, Equal Exchange, and Rainforest Alliance. But ultimately, it's up to us, the consumers, to stop funding this practice, because I don't think protecting children is at the top of Nestle's priority list. With the war on information more prominent than ever, it can be daunting to sort through the garbage and propaganda just to find real news. And even if it comes from so-called reputable sources, special interests with financial backing provide enough reason for us to question just about everything we see, hear, and read. Last year, it was announced that the Washington Post had been bought out by billionaire entrepreneur and founder of Amazon.com, Jeff Bezos. A connection that didn't make the news, however, is that Amazon also recently landed a sweet deal with CIA, totaling a whopping $600 million. With Bezos directly profiting from the CIA and being the sole owner of the Washington Post, the situation at hand paints a pretty glaring conflict of interest. So much so that the organization Roots Action recently launched a petition and gathered more than 30,000 signatures urging the publication for more disclosure. That petition was delivered to the Washington Post headquarters just this week. Joining me now to take a closer look at the implications of this story, I'm joined by the founder of RootsAction.org and director of the Institute for Public Accuracy, Norman Solomon. Thanks so much for coming back on, Norman. So, Norman, we know that Amazon's Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post. Very little attention has been paid to the $600 million contract. Can you break down for people who don't know what that is, what that contract's all about?
Yeah, Amazon cut a deal with the CIA last year, as you say, $600 million to run the computing cloud for all of the secrets and data that the CIA want to organize and keep out of the public purview. And that's a lot of the problem, because if you've got an independent media outlet that's supposed to be independent like the Washington Post, its job is, among other things, to expose the secrets of an outfit like the CIA. But Bezos, as you say, the sole owner of the Washington Post and a big owner of Amazon, he's got a job there at Amazon to keep the secrets of the CIA. So which is it? Expose their secrets or keep the secrets? Well, in this case, it's all about maximizing profit. The guy's already got $25 billion of personal wealth, and as far as he's concerned, he's just getting started.
What other business ties, if any, does Bezos have that might implicate the Post's journalistic integrity or might call attention to his investment here?
Amazon, the whole world is now a big department store for that company, and it's mind-blowing just the extent of what they're buying and selling and their interest in either retail being suppressed or enhanced depending on whether they get more profit as a result. I think really this is a growth industry for them, because Amazon has already said they look forward to what they call a successful relationship with the CIA. So the $600 million multi-year contract is just getting started. When you think about it, Amazon has tremendous amounts, billions of factoids about people, what they buy, what they're interested in, where they live, how they buy. And the CIA is also in the same two realms, keeping secrets and gathering data.
I did think it was weird when, I mean, that's the least of what I thought, but it is very strange that the CIA would contract with Amazon to store all of their most top secret classified information on this cloud when they're saying we want to keep it out of the public view. Meanwhile, Amazon has access to it. I mean, potentially, it just seems like that's really shady in itself. The Post, however, has responded to these concerns, Norman. They're saying it's absurd to have to disclose Bezos' CIA connection every time we mention the CIA. I mean, what do you think? Do you think that it should be mentioned every time that the CIA is covered in the Post?
If there's a traffic accident in front of the CIA headquarters, I don't think it would need to be mentioned. But any substantive coverage of the CIA, to understand it, I think would require, from a journalistic transparency standpoint, I mean, let's face it, Americans are conditioned to think, oh, if governments are funding, then we need to know, but if corporations are funding, we don't need to know. So like Voice of America, funded by the U.S. government. This network, funded by the Russian government. A Chinese news outlet, funded by the Chinese government. Okay, well, that should be known. It should be known more. But when it comes to corporations, this is behind the curtain like the Wizard of Oz. I would wager there's only 1 or 2 or 3% of Washington Post readers who know that when they're reading, as today actually, the front page, a story about the CIA of their newspaper, that the guy who owns the paper is making a killing from contracting with that agency. So they're at cross purposes. Is that guy up to keeping secrets or exposing them?
It's a good point. Whenever you're talking about corporate-run media, it's so much more insidious. There could be hundreds of different interests playing into what you're seeing, what you're, the bias, the perspective that's being covered on there. We talk about the Post's journalistic integrity. Does the paper have a good track record when it comes to covering the government?
Well, it's often covering up the government. I mean, when they get documents, there's a history with the Bush and Obama administrations going to the White House saying, what do you think about this? We'll take under advisement whether you think we ought to disclose this document or not. And I would say it's a very mixed record, but a lot of it is an ideological perspective that overlaps to the point that, frankly, it's often just a propaganda sheet for whoever's in power in Washington.
All right, it's kind of hard to tell the difference anymore between corporate America and the government, but this is kind of an open, hey, let's marry both.
Yes, absolutely, and they're just getting started.
Do you think that this example is the most glaring conflict of interest in mainstream media today?
I think it's a new bridge that's been crossed, because when you think about it, the importance of digital technology is extreme now. And I mean, that capacity to use the surveillance state and the warfare state to gather information, but also to take action, whether it's covert action or overt targeting of drones. So, for instance, if the Post is covering something the CIA is doing, the top editors told me in an email, Martin Barron said, oh, don't worry, it's not relevant to this cloud contract that our owner has with the CIA. Well, how do we know? Because we don't know what's in that cloud, but we've got to assume that it includes drone strike information, counterinsurgency data, for that matter, entire global information about how to wage surreptitious and overt war on the part of the United States. So the Post can't say that something is irrelevant when they're covering the CIA, because you got to figure it's $600 million. There's a heck of a lot in that cloud that the CIA is entrusting to Amazon, now the owner of the Washington Post, essentially through Bezos, to keep it quiet. So, hey, let's have transparency. That's the best disinfectant, is more sunlight.
And talk about the petition. Was there any reaction after it was delivered? And really, what specifically is it calling for the Post to do?
Well, a petition from rootsaction.org, and people can still sign, is saying when you have coverage of the CIA, at the very least, let your readers know that the only owner of this newspaper has a huge financial deal going with the CIA. The response from the Post was initially cool, and it's gotten a lot colder. By the time I delivered this big stack, it was getting a lot of ice cubes here in January. I delivered the stack, and they told me to go back to the service entrance around the corner, and it turned out they directed me through an alley to actually deliver. Well, just about, and where the front entrance was not suitable for me even to deliver. And I was really disappointed that out of his busy schedule, the executive editor, Martin Barron, couldn't take a few minutes to come down and chat, let me summarize the thousands of comments that the petitioners who've signed it have made, very cogent ones. Instead, frankly, they're putting up a stone wall. They want the story to go away.
They want it to die, yeah. I mean, it is amazing kind of that he didn't even give you the time of day to really listen to the voice of over 30,000 consumers and potential readers of the Washington Post.
Yeah, and it's a very odd thing because he's turning down, this is again the top editor of the Washington Post, one of the premier political newspapers in the world. He's refusing to grant media interviews to even talk about this. So how does somebody who oversees hundreds of journalists doing hundreds of interviews every day tell other journalists, I don't want to talk about this, you can't interview me?
Bizarre. We have about 30 seconds left, but what's your advice for people who kind of still think of these establishment media publications as the only credible sources that they can get?
Widen the ecology of your media. Don't take anybody as a gospel, and understand that corporate funding and ownership is as pernicious and dangerous and biased as any other way that media can be owned and purveyed. We've got to understand that there are billions of dollars at stake, and that includes the most esteemed media outlets in the United States.
And billions of lives of the people who are, you know, being underreported, censored outright by the inaction of these publications. Thank you so much, Norman Solomon, founder, rootsaction.org. Everyone check it out. Thanks for watching, you guys. Join me again tomorrow when I break the set all over again. Thank you so much for coming in. Set off nukes was, wait for it, 00000000. Yep, 8 zeros in a row. But don't worry, I'm sure by now the Air Force has changed that code to 12345678. Now let's break the set.
It was a terrible mistake, and we're working very hard to make up for it.
And once again, we put something on the air. It's a flat-out lie.
Have you ever had sex with
procedures? But if that's not enough to make you want to cower under a table, don't worry, it gets worse. The whole reason this cheating scandal came to light in the first place is because the Air Force launched an investigation into drug use among officers at the base and discovered the cheating through their text messages. Isn't it nice to know that Rob Ford and Alex Rodriguez are apparently guarding the nation's nuclear arsenal? But at the very least, we know that the nuclear launch codes are extremely complicated and hard to crack, right? Actually, no. You see, according to Dr. Bruce Blair, former nuclear missile launch officer, up until 1977, the launch code displayed the devious and sneaky methods Big Brother uses to keep a constant eye on all of us. But now it looks like Big Brother is about to watch himself. You see, yesterday, Los Angeles police officers began participating in a case study involving wearing belt and shoulder cameras as cops patrol the streets. According to officials, the captured video is instantly displayed on an iPod and then uploaded, where the video is saved for 5 years. About 30 officers are participating in the program over the next 90 days, and the use of these cameras are expected to be widely expanded. Take a look.
By the summer, 600 cameras will be purchased with
Good evening to you. I'm Abby Martin, and this is Breaking the Set. Well, here's a story that's sure to keep you up at night. According to findings just released by the Air Force, 34 officers at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana were just caught cheating on a proficiency exam. All right. So cheating on a test isn't really that bad. I mean, we've all done it. Except I forgot to mention one small thing. Malmstrom houses ballistic missiles, and the officers caught cheating were taking a test on nuclear launch
Repair.
No, wait. Do not answer that. I want you to watch what we're about to do because you've never seen anything like this on television. What we need is to question more and to keep it uncensored, real and raw. My simple mission is to change the globe. I'ma do it with this passion and fire and tone. These words are hard hitting, you're watching your neck, but you need to tune in because we're breaking the set. Breaking the set.
On this show, I try to highlight